But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator...
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 259, when no big deal is fatal. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and Badger-in-Chief, Allison Tiemann. Lauren is unable to be here tonight, so we're going to continue last week's article next week when she returns. Tonight, we're going to be discussing an article on a big topic with widespread impact, which feminists have spent years minimizing. And I have put a link to that article in the low bar. Really quick, I need to put Mike in the picture too, because I didn't do that before the show. So there is Mike, and where is Mike's chair?
We got a drive-by badgering.
Yes,
badger dropping in.
Well, you got to be careful, in the United States.
Appears.
Like that's you could be subject to arrest for that. Like, I know a guy that was arrested for a drive-by greeting once. So, we've talked about that before. But and he's on topic because that was a false allegation. It never happened, and it was also under a false restraining order. So there you go. But let's get into doing what we got to do before we do what we came here to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthatip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So, when we discuss these issues, most feminists will answer with the same kind of tired, worn-out platitudes, right? It's rare, so it doesn't matter. If he has nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear. It's not harmful to him, so it's no big deal. What do you consider driving a teenager to suicide harmful enough to take it seriously? Oh, wait. Feminists who want guys to be totally stoic about false allegations tell us that the male suicide is caused by too much male stoicism as a result of social pressure known as toxic masculinity, largely from media. Doesn't have anything to do with them telling men to shut up about their issues or anything.
If there's any justice in the cosmos, there has to be a level of hell for people who tell boys that they can learn from a false allegation. It's a learning opportunity. And then say that boys who embrace stoicism, which is basically just relying on yourself to overcome the negative things that happen to you, are toxically masculine. To condemn what you insist men show is just a level of perfidy that's profound.
Yeah, it is.
Ooh,
it's truly disgusting.
And you might ask yourself, why is it only in recent years that we're hearing about so many of these cases of rapes in schools? And you may say, well, the old tired feminist excuse would be, well, boys have been raping girls in schools for centuries, or at least for as long as there have been boys and girls in the same schools, and it's only recently that the patriarchy has been overcome to the point where we can even bring any of them to action. And then you may wonder, well, is that the case, or have boys been falsely accused of raping girls for a long time, and they've been going on to commit suicide, and we've just been saying, well, isn't it weird how so many students commit suicide at such a young state in their life? And it's never made headline stories such as this until recently, because there have been the likes of us going,
Yeah.
And there's been independent journalism looking into it. Not that the Daily Mail is independent journalism, or whichever New Jersey outlet got this stuff across. But
honestly,
nobody knows.
We wouldn't be hearing about this. They wouldn't be reporting on this. We wouldn't be hearing about this if it was suicide that ended with the suicide, right? The family suing. The headline: top $76,000 a year New Jersey boarding school admits more should have been done to stop bullying a 17-year-old boy, 17, who took his own life after being falsely accused of rape for a year by cruel peers. That's followed up by several bullet points. I don't know if it's not where the lawsuit is mentioned, but I saw this lawsuit mentioned, and this was mentioned on Reddit, in the men's rights subreddit. And it's not in the bullet points, but the bullet points basically explain the story. Jack Reed, 17, student at Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, took his own life after being bullied by other students. A year after his death, a school statement recognizes... It took a year, guys. The failure of the school to protect Jack, noting how inaction by teaching staff contributed to his death. School is committed to taking corrective actions, including appointing a new dean who will be responsible for dealing with mental health issues. And if you are having thoughts of suicide, it gives a suicide hotline and a website to go to. So that's caller text
Where are the slut walks?
and it's speakingofsuicide.com.
Is there a number you can call for being falsely accused of rape? So we can cut off this suicide thing at the pass? Maybe.
Well,
that doesn't matter.
It uses the word bullying, but doesn't described the allegation in the bullet points. Right? It's covered under bullying. And this is the first time I've seen false allegations referred to in this way in a non-men's rights activist publication. And I don't know if they admitted this on purpose or not, but I mean, bullying is how you describe abuse when it's done by kids, underage kids, right? That's just it. It's abuse, but we don't like to accuse kids harshly, so we use the word bullying instead, right? So
and you think we can pull down the term abuse to children,
yeah.
but in many adult workplaces, it's gone the other way. The childish term bullying has been pulled up into, and I've worked for the government, and they have bulletins about no bullying in the workplace among adults, like ranging from 20 to 60. Like, no bullying in the workplace is so pathetic.
The difference is if a group of kids beats on somebody until they commit suicide, whether it's physical or verbal beating on somebody until they commit suicide, they call that bullying. If you hear bullying among a group of adults, a lot of times the complaints are petty, and or not even legitimate, right? Like, they might call you bossy if you ask for information you need in order to correctly do the paperwork that's required for your job. Like, I've been through that. that's bullying to an adult, and it's usually women making the allegation.
What is it that this teacher did that they're apologizing for?
So here we go. Right? An elite New Jersey boarding school has admitted that more should have been done after a student took his own life in his dorm room following a year of bullying by his peers. Jack Reed, 17, attended the Lawrence School between Trenton and Princeton, where tuition is $76,000 a year. That is... houses in Dayton go for less than that. Right? In fact, the average housing price in Dayton, unless you get into the wealthy parts of the suburbs, is less than that. He died on April 30th, 2022. But in the 12 months leading up to his death, he had become a victim of a vicious bullying campaign that consisted of cruel and malicious rumors that labeled him as a campus rapist. The rumors were made up by fellow students and were said to Jack both in person and posted anonymously online, thereby spreading the story beyond the campus walls. During a Secret Santa gift exchange among his classmates, Jack was given a rape whistle together with a book about how to make friends. And you can see this is a picture, well, it's awfully big in the screen here. Let me see if I can shrink this down momentarily so that... come on, there we go. Nope, it doesn't shrink.
I have to wonder how you can tell the difference between a rape whistle and an ordinary whistle, unless it's served in one of those plastic packets with, with actual like text saying "rape whistle new from."
They make these whistles and they're extremely loud. They have a really high pitch, like the kind of whistle that you get on TV when somebody sticks their two fingers in their mouths and whistles like that, or in real life, there are people that will put their tongue on the roof of their mouth between their two front teeth if they got a good little space in there, and they'll whistle, and it's really high-pitched like that. Different from a referee whistle, which in and of itself is pretty loud. Once we got to the age where we were allowed to wander around the neighborhood farther from home than the sound of Mom and Dad's voice could carry to call us home, we had a whistle code.
Are we supposed to recognize these various different bird calls? Like,
this
whistle
people
means
are supposed
fire.
to know.
This whistle means rape. Can you not just shout rape? Would that not be simpler?
See, what I think is, if you really want women to feel safe, you have them carry an air horn. Carry an air horn in your bag, your purse. Well, for me, I'd have to get a little tiny one and stick in my pocket. And if somebody tries to attack you, you shove the air horn in their face. Anybody that knows how loud these things are knows where I'm going with this. And you set it off, and they will just be so startled and slightly deafened for the moment that you get a chance to run away and you don't have to worry about it.
But is it an air horn or a rape air horn?
It's both. It's both. As soon as you stick an air horn in somebody's face and set it off, they're going to feel like you just raped the fuck out of their ears. And their face. But yeah, so I gotta bring the size of the picture back here because I can't read the text at that size because I'm old. But in any case, this young man is obviously just a regular guy. He just looks like a regular guy, probably a preppy. I bet everybody that goes to that school is a preppy. For people outside the 80s, in the United States, a preppy was somebody who was kind of like a nerd, but they were preparing specifically to go to college, so they weren't really a nerd on purpose. They were more career-oriented. And so preppy was short for college prep student. And you could major in college prep at some schools. Other schools didn't have majors. But this young man just looks like, a kid that would have a job and maybe be involved in some athletic team, be probably on some academic team as well. Like if you had any kind of quiz team or in a, any kind of club related to academic ideas, like we had for kids that were studying foreign languages, we had the international club. Kid would be involved in that kind of stuff. Just ordinary kid. Not like the kid that people look at and say, oh, this is going to be an incel, he's creepy, he looks bad, he's got greasy hair or pimples or bad facial features or whatever. No. The guy that got falsely accused was a regular, average, ordinary guy. Any guy. Your average Joe. Aside from the fact that he was attending a very expensive school, which means obviously coming from an amount of money didn't stop him from facing this either.
We often
he
say
would be considered privileged, and he still got falsely accused.
Yeah, we often say homeschool your children because it's got to be better than state school, and from that we leave out the private schools because we assume those will be any better. But yeah, no, not necessarily.
Yeah,
those are getting just as susceptible. You can
What?
You can pay out the nose for your child's education and still get this kind of treatment.
there are still girls there.
What did the teacher do? Like, what a teacher was involved, which is what made them apologize. Incidentally, if this had been a situation with a girl, there would have been worldwide protests.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll get on. Although the staff were made aware of the bullying, the school has now admitted. Why on earth is this not showing? Okay, no, they just have an extra word in there. The school has now admitted an extraordinary, make an extraordinary mission of failure on the anniversary of Jack's death. They didn't proofread that very well. Sorry. So the school basically on the anniversary of his death, they have admitted that they failed him extraordinarily. There were steps that the school, in hindsight, should have taken, but did not. The school wrote in a lengthy statement. Most damning of all is the fact that the school did not make public, or did not make a public or private statement that it had in fact investigated the rape and found the rumors about Jack and the entire story to be completely untrue. So here's this boy who is going through this profound situation of repeated, in his face, reiteration of this false allegation and being ribbed around this false allegation, being bullied around this false allegation. And the school had somebody investigate it. And I would imagine that's the teacher that's mentioned. School had somebody investigate it, found it to be unfounded, did not tell him that he was exonerated. Neither Jack nor his parents were ever told that he had been exonerated over the claims, did not tell the students that he was exonerated, did nothing to stop the bullying. The school's officials have now admitted that they were aware of the bullying but fell short in their obligation to protect him. So when people tell you that feminism is harmless, remind them, feminists are the ones that promote the myth that false allegations are harmless, that if a person experiences false allegations, that he has nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear, and he has
There's no harm done.
he doesn't suffer anything, that only real victims of real sexual assault are suffering, and that somehow if his suffering is alleviated, that harms them, right? Which it doesn't, but that's the allegation that we get from feminists, that men and boys who complain about false allegations are attacking real victims over something that does zero harm to them.
And this is what it takes for the victim to be more recognized than the false accuser. He has to actually die by his own hand. Everyone remembers Mattress Girl. I mean, we don't remember her name, but we don't remember the name of the young man she victimized. Everyone remembers the Duke Lacrosse case and the case of the Rolling Stone accusation. All of these were confirmed to be false, but no one ever remembers the victims of these accusations, who were real young men whose lives were changed forever. Hopefully they got over it by now, because, like I say, none of us remember their names, and I guess we can be grateful that we don't remember the names of the perpetrators either, except the smear merchant media conglomerates that made these accusations nationally public in the first place.
And yet, without really recanting it. So the damage is already done. The atmosphere is tainted. What I find remarkable about this is, imagine if this was a girl and they had investigated a rape. Because the funny thing is that false rape accusations have a lot of the same post trauma symptoms as rape. The difficulty trusting, the difficulty having intimate relationships, the mental health issues. There's another thing I want to point out about the mental health in this case, which is absurd. But imagine if it had been a girl who had been raped, and they had investigated it, found out that her allegation was true, knew who had done it. Let's say it was another girl, because it's just not believable that they'd do it if it was a boy. And they just hushed up everything until she killed herself. This school would not exist right now.
If that
it would have been
happened,
ensued into oblivion.
If that happened, there would be a federal investigation, because
Yes.
Title IX has been updated over the years, many years, by the Department of Education to include certain requirements, and among them is the Clery Act, where they have to record what they are doing in terms of investigations into such things, and also they have to have, they would have to have a tribunal, they would have to have an outcome, right? They would have, if somebody came to the school with an allegation like that, and they investigated it, and they would have to take action on the outcome of that tribunal. If there is an allegation that they investigate that's being used for bullying, and which again is just code for abuse when kids do it, and they investigate that and they find nothing, there's no allegation or no validity to the allegation, they're not required to take any action against the accuser. But if the accused is guilty of something, they are required to take action against the accused. That's the way Title IX is written, or not Title IX, but the policy that the federal government has in place in regard to Title IX. That's the way it's written. So, and I want to point out, the officials that failed to do anything did not take this boy's situation seriously, because they have heard over and over again, they've been trained over and over again, that sexual violence is very serious, but that allegations of sexual violence are not. That the experience of sexual violence is very serious, but that the experience of being accused is not. and that they should take heavy actions in response to allegations, that they should make being accused a major threat to the accused, but they should not show any compassion to the accused as if he is facing a major threat. Right? That is why they did not take this boy's situation seriously. And that is a feminist narrative that is in place in official capacity. It's
Sounds like this was an
institutionalized.
activist institution.
Well,
Sounds like this was
no.
an activist institution as
This-
well. No, the atmosphere at the campus. I was just reading some commentary by another
This is
parent
normal.
who didn't send their kid to this. That the atmosphere at the campus was very hard and activistic. So like activist. So it's likely that this was. I mean, this may be everywhere as well, but I'm saying that this is probably a feminist campus or a feminist-run campus.
It might be, but any public school, any university, and most private schools are going to have this problem as well. This is one of the things, and I guess the way I'm going to put it is this: if you go to university in the United States to become a school teacher, all right, you're going to get certification for your state, so you're going to want to go to a university in your state for this. But in every state of the union, gender studies has expanded into interdisciplinary studies, and interdisciplinary studies has been branched out like a little tree, like a fractal, into every little area that it can possibly fit into. So when you take business administration, you get gender studies through interdisciplinary studies in terms of anything to do with human resources. When you take psychology, you get a shitload of it. When you take education, you get a shitload of it. When you go to nursing school or medical school to become a doctor or any other kind of specialist, you get a shitload of it. This is not something that just happens at activist schools. Activist schools, it'll be easier to do this to somebody, but it'll be easier to do this to somebody in a way that it is easier to break through millimeter thick ice than centimeter thick ice with a 20-pound sledgehammer. We're talking about little resistance versus zero.
Yeah, the long, slow march through the institutions, as it's called,
Yes.
that have been made by feminists, obviously only at this point is starting to get its tendrils into the military and the police. But it started with the places into which women have always had the most access, and that starts with education, because there's never been anything stopping women from being teachers in everything from kindergarten to universities. So obviously that's where it starts. And if you can see where the tendrils, where the tips of the branches are getting nowadays, imagine what it's like in the places where they've had their roots buried ever since, I want to say, the 60s at the very latest. And at this point, they are feminist institutions, and they have been for so many generations that it's no one can imagine them being anything else.
Can you just imagine that they found out that this hadn't happened? They didn't tell anyone. They made no announcement because they didn't care about this kid. Like every person, every parent with a boy in this school, your boy is considered expendable by this institution's administration. They're only saying this, they're only apologizing because they got caught out. But can you imagine that? Knowing it and not even thinking it necessary to exonerate this kid. Just let him continue to suffer and just be like, well, our butts are covered. We got the important information, which is that, this is a false accusation. That's all we need to know. Because all we care about is whether or not a girl was harmed. That's it. That's all we care about. That's it. That 100%. That is the only thing they cared about all of this. That's the only explanation for why they did this. that they would investigate this, tell no one their finding, absolutely no one. They only cared whether or not a girl was getting hurt. They didn't care about what happened to this boy at all. He was completely expendable to them. Completely. He didn't even... One of their students, the well-being of one of their students, didn't even ping on their radar at all. And what's really incredible to me is they're putting this on mental health. Like, this is... Our society really has a problem with this mental health thing. Okay? You say, oh, men need better mental... Or, no, not men need better mental health services. Men need to avail them of all of the plethora of services that the society gives them. So many men are just rolling in mental health services. And they just refuse. They turn their noses up like the spoiled little patriarchal brats they are. First of all, they don't exist. Second of all, look at this situation. How is telling this boy, you don't exonerate him, you don't tell anybody that you've investigated this and said, oh, well, actually this didn't happen, you don't tell, you just tell him, oh yeah, you're feeling a little bit depressed, why don't you go and deal with your mental health issues? Like, what the hell is that? You punch someone in the face and then say, oh, well, you should deal with that mental health issue, have another punch. Punch, 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 punch. Oh, look, more mental health issues. How about you stop punching them? How about you deal with the thing that's causing the problem? This is what infuriates me about the mental health discussion around men. Why don't you deal with the false accusation? Why don't you clear it up? Why are you now saying, after all this shit, your conclusion is, oh, well, I guess those people who have fragile mental health like this boy, well, they should just be forced to go and see therapy. Is that your conclusion? Because look at this, their conclusion, oh, we need a dean that deals with mental health. No, you need a dean that takes a paddle to these assholes who make false accusations and kicks them out. A metaphorical paddle. You know, that's a paddling paddle.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, they don't actually use real ones in the United States anymore. But I gotta point out what they're doing, what feminists are doing with regard to this, is saying that if you get upset when you are abused, because we're seeing it admitted now, making a false allegation against you is abuse. The person who makes the false allegation is an abuser. Right? That's an abusive behavior. It's an abusive act to make a false allegation of against someone. And you're now being told that if you get upset about being abused by a female, that means that you have a mental health condition.
Yeah,
That's
we should be
gaslighting.
We should be just as suspicious of the term mental health as we are of the term gender reassignment. Gender affirmation health, or whatever it is. Because what we're only just discovering that in that area has been long since, overtaken and dominated by the very same feminist cult. And what the vast majority of psychologists, particularly the ones associated with universities and schools, what they call mental health, is becoming a mentally healthy woman. They never gave any thought as to what it means to be a mentally healthy man. And that's how we got here in the first place.
But objecting to being abused is not mentally unhealthy. It is mentally healthy. You are not crazy when you get upset because somebody has done something wrong to you.
No.
Unless you're a man complaining about what something a woman has done to you. That's mentally unhealthy. And you need to go to what we call therapy.
Report to the nearest re-education center immediately.
And I remind you people, like, this is the same institution that used to consider a slave trying to escape to be a mental health disorder.
Yeah.
These are the people.
They just don't refer to black people. They're talking about men. If you drop out of what normal society and normal, and now you can't see me doing the scare quotes, but what the establishment wants you to do: get a well-paying job, marry somebody, support a family, put up with it when she leaves you, pay child support, and let the state siphon off part of that. Don't complain, work yourself to death, lay down and die, and then after you're dead, get taxed one more fucking time. If you don't do that, they call you a nut. They accuse you of depression. They come up with special terms for you for dropping out of society. They refer to you as abnormal. They refer to you as if you are a threat to society, right? They don't make you as big a threat if you don't want to get married as you are if you do want to be with somebody and you can't. But either way, if you're trying to escape the slave system, where you're being taxed to death, you're being made responsible for everything, you're subject to a woman's whims, and you have no recourse if she is unaccountable, they treat you like you're crazy. So they're still doing it. They just don't limit it to black men now. It's all
you
men.
Can't. I'm gonna make a proclamation, and this proclamation should be binding. You cannot speak on the issues of men's mental health unless you also advocate for men's issues and the end of men's unfair suffering in our society. Yeah. You don't get to be the surgeon that's stabbing the patient and sewing them up, and the hero who sews them up at the same time. So all of you psychologists, you don't get to condemn men's mental health. You don't get to condemn men's suicide rate on their mental health, or more accurately on their quote-unquote toxic masculinity or hegemonic masculinity or traditional masculinity, or whatever way you want to brand masculinity as to blame. You don't get to blame it on them. You don't even get to speak legitimately on men's mental health unless you recognize that the issues that cause suffering to men should not be exacerbated by social policy, social and legal and political policy, and should not be promoted by academia as some kind of what is feminism? Gigantic lie?
It's a cult
about the sexes
based on a crazy conspiracy theory. Honestly, you think about patriarchy theory. Patriarchy theory is a gender-wide false allegation that throughout all of history, the male population has conspired to arrange society to, for their own undefined benefit, oppress all of the female population throughout history. And the female population has been unable throughout history, despite being totally equal to the male population, to be able to get out from under that thumb until compassion was invented in the United States in the 1960s. Compassion for women. Suddenly, now we have the capacity to get out from under men's thumbs. That's feminism in a nutshell.
To speak to what Alison was saying, I don't think it's any coincidence that we have such a culture of doctors acting as glorified pharmacologists, sort of prescribing all manner of legal amphetamines and various SSRIs to combat a depression that's not even based on the chemistry or biology of the patient in question. Like, if someone wakes up in this world that has been created and realizes it sucks, that doesn't mean they have a chemical mental condition that needs to be treated with a bunch of pills. And that goes for adults, never mind boys. Like, no doctor should be prescribing a face full of pills to a boy who looks around him and goes, well, this kind of sucks, doesn't it? Like, maybe you could look at, dare I say, the societal reasons that a boy might look around him and logically conclude that this all kind of sucks. Because he's right. He's dead right. This does kind of suck.
You know, back in the 80s when I was growing up in northern Ohio, it was becoming increasingly common. My dad was very disturbed by this. He was at that time he was teaching in the junior high in our school system. He had taught from the younger elementary level up into he taught high school kids, but the kids he taught were the kids with learning disabilities who weren't necessarily going on to the same outcomes that some of the other students were, but the school, they were attending school to receive better outcomes than they might have if they didn't have any assistance. So he's done everything from helping kids with serious learning disabilities become employable so that they could have some independence in their adulthood, to teaching 4th and 5th graders science and math and reading and English and all that. And he was teaching 13-year-olds for the longest part of his career, 13, 14-year-old junior high school students. And he was seeing more and more kids come in with individual, what's it called? Individual educational plans, IEPs, I think. And what it is the kid is diagnosed with something, and the school has to consider their diagnosis in terms of discipline and their educational requirements and so on. And more and more kids were coming in with IEPs that cited attention deficit disorder and Ritalin. More and more of them were boys. Mostly not girls, mostly boys. And it's kids that get diagnosed at about the age where a kid's wiggles still outweigh his common sense in the classroom. And if he doesn't get enough recess time to work those out, his behavior in the classroom is going to be unacceptable to his teacher. And that's just a fact. You can't deny that children need playtime in order to be able to focus on studies. It's documented, it's studied and documented. And at our school system, it was school board policy that you could not take away a child's recess as punishment. Well, as this was happening, I would have been in like the 4th grade, and my brother would have been in the 2nd grade, and he had a teacher that was keeping him in at recess to complete work that he wasn't getting done during class, because unlike the other students, he was very meticulous, and he was getting 100% on everything because he was going back and double checking his work and making sure. He was measuring twice so that he only had to cut once in everything that he did. And other students would rush through their work, they would get out to recess, they would come back in and play, and he was missing all 3 recesses. We didn't find out about it until one day he just broke down and sobbed, like his heart was broken when Mom asked him to do a chore after school, which we always did. We had chores to do after school, and she said, "You've had time to play outside already today. Just take some time to do this and you can play some more." And he said, "I haven't had any recess today at all." And that's how we found out. The teachers weren't even communicating to my parents that he wasn't getting his work done in the classroom. And my dad had to go in and talk to this teacher about this. And he said, "What is it you're trying to teach the kid?" Because he asked, all the other students have perfect work that are getting to have their recess. Is their work perfect? Well, no. They're missing problems. They're getting wrong answers on their problems. Kids do that. But his work, is he getting a lot of wrong answers? Is he not able to perform the work? No, he's actually one of the few students in the class that's getting 100%. Well, why do you think that is? He's double checking his work. So what you're teaching the kids is that if they rush through and do half a job, they get to go outside and play. But if they're careful and they do a good job, they don't. And then he showed her the part in the book, the school board policy book. This is where it says that you're not allowed to do what you're doing to my son. And he had to actually go to the principal because the teacher objected. Like, well, I don't care if it's policy. I'm not going to change my rules. And she changed her rules. She didn't like him very much for a little while after that. But that was the first time my father threatened a lawsuit in response to something the school did wrong. And it wasn't the last time. And it always seemed to fall on my brother. But they screwed him over a bunch of times. They screwed me over twice. And both times it took one conversation with my dad, and that was the end of it. But the issue that he was noticing, and that I remember from growing up, is boys' needs for breaks and time to work out the excess energy, the excess physical energy. Kids get the zoomies just like cats. Boys get the zoomies bigger and more frequently than girls. When boys get the zoomies, they have less control over them than girls. And so what happens? Your teacher looks at your 8-year-old kid and says, "Oh, your kid has attention deficit disorder." No, he's a boy. Leave him alone. So by the time I grew up, I was all geared up to fight about it. If my son was, diagnosed by the school. But by that time, they had fortunately started reforming that. And I didn't have to fight that battle, which is fortunate for whoever would have brought it up to me, because I was already mad about it because of the way my brother was treated growing up. My brother is a genius. Like, you guys tell me you think I'm smart, but you have not met smart until you meet my brother. Like, he blows me out of the water. I can't even begin to tell you. And he didn't deserve to be treated like that. And if they do that to a legit genius, then they're going to do that to every boy in the classroom. And they don't take into consideration the boy's experience. They only take into consideration how it affects the teacher's control over the classroom. And they treat him like he's a problem.
But they will single out the geniuses, by the way. That's worth pointing out.
Yeah.
The boys that go along with what the girls tell them to do are not as in danger as the boys who can think for themselves. That's the horrific reality of the situation.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And I saw that with friends. One of the things my brother had that I never had was he could fit in. He's very social. If you were going to call somebody in the family a social butterfly, that would be him, right? That was definitely not me. And I had friends who were, kids that today would get labeled threats and called incels and all kinds of stuff. None of them were dangerous. They were just isolated or lonely or socially awkward. I had friends that I was their only friend. And I just was friends with whoever was willing to be friends with me. So that led me to be friends with pretty much everybody, at least on some level. And there are guys that were good guys, that were smart, that were kind. Everything that boys are, right? They were curious. They had ingenuity. They were friendly to people. They just didn't know the rules of how to connect with other people very well. That got treated like diseases, because they were different. They had this kind of facial feature difference, or they had dandruff, or they couldn't control body odor, or they didn't know how to talk to people. They knew too much about math. They liked math too much. Whatever. They could program your computer, and that was back in the 80s weird. That was, but yeah, like those guys did get singled out, and they did get treated like they were a threat to somebody even when they did nothing wrong. And what's really dumb is when somebody was a threat, male or female, if that person was socially adept, that threat wasn't recognized. And I went through that too, and I saw my friends go through that too. Bullying from both sexes. Not very much. My school was small, and there wasn't a lot of, if I got bullied by somebody and I broke their nose, my school would basically treat it like, well, even score here. That person bullied this person hit them back and broke their nose. Now they won't do it anymore. Problem solved, right? You get detention, but we knew you did what you had to do, right? That was and as a result, there wasn't a shitload of bullying in the school, and we never had a school shooting either. Not that I think violence is necessarily the answer, but certainly ignoring the problem, and after you discover that the type of bullying, being a false allegation, was completely illegitimate and egregiously wrong, you do nothing. Like, that's certainly not a good response either. In my opinion, the accuser, the original accuser, should have been tracked down. Who made this rumor up? And anybody that had repeated the rumor should have been threatened with punishment until they admitted who told them the rumor. Where did you hear this? Where did this rumor come to you from? Until they got to the originator of the rumor. And when they get to the originator of the rumor, that person should have been kicked out of school. That school should not harbor that person any further, ever again.
It's difficult to tell how much bullying goes on, because bullying typically gets passed down, much like it gets passed down from parents to, let's say, the eldest child, and the eldest child passes it down to the next child down, and then to the next child down, and then the child at the bottom rung of the ladder has nowhere to go other than perhaps in the school. And it's much the same in the school dynamic.
No.
The child at the top of the social ladder, whatever problems they have at home, they pass that punch on down to the next to the next lowest social rank in the school, and they pass it down to the next lowest until it gets to the very lowest rank in the school. The outcast kids who have no one to pass it down to. And
well, there is that.
They tend to be the ones who explode in a rather dramatic affair that might even make it onto the news.
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying.
There is that, but there is also, like, my one really bad bully in high school, and she was younger than me, actually, but she was bigger than me too. And she didn't use much physical aggression. It was mostly relational aggression. She was an only kid. If I understand right, she didn't have any siblings. I don't think she had a dad at home. And her mom kind of let her run wild. And she was a piece of work. I'm not going to get into a lot about her, but I will say that a big part of the reason that she was a bully was because she had no accountability, no boundaries. Nobody came along and made her stop when her behavior was bad, because you couldn't tell her mom. You couldn't, like, the school couldn't go to her mom and say, Mrs. Bully's mom, Bully did these things and it's inappropriate. And mom would be like, oh, well, I'm going to have her sit down and talk to me about this, and we're going to settle that she doesn't behave that way, and this is the discipline that's going to take place. Like, that's not what would happen. That would have happened if, my parents were contacted and I was doing something bad. But her mom would have said, stop talking about my daughter that way. I'm going to sue the school if you do anything. I'm not accepting this, and that's as far as it would go. So she never got in any trouble, and she was actually in a gang that, I think I've talked a little bit about getting involved with a gang that I didn't realize was a gang until I'd been hanging out with them for about a year, and they were rivals, and that's why she went after me. I didn't know that until I'd been out of school for years. Didn't understand that till I'd been out of school for years. She got involved, and then both of those were in other communities. 2 separate other communities, by the way. And it was all about territory where drugs were being sold. And I had no idea, right? The school, had they been able to do anything about that situation, had the mom done anything about that situation, might have prevented the spread of drugs being sold in our community about 2 or 3 years before it just flat out exploded. But they didn't. So I ended up living next door to a drug dealer a few years later. Just horrible. Anyway, but yeah, school's not doing anything about bullying when women do it, when girls do it, and girls not being accountable because of their parents, and in particular because of a single mom. Like, that's a huge issue. So it's not just siblings. It's not just bullying being handed down and handed down and handed down. There is also neglect that causes it, and it has widespread repercussions in the community.
Yeah, it's not even called bullying when girls do it. As reductive and childish a term bullying is, it's not even applied when young girls do it to young boys. There's no such word for what it means when young girls do it to young boys. Much like there's no such word when adult women do it to adult men. I guess it's called nagging, as a euphemism for abuse. But it's all just abuse. We neglect to call it what it is when a female of any age does it to a male of any age, and that's I guess what we'd all be better off if we could highlight, at least using basic language.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So what steps are the schools going to take? This one had a particular set here. They came up with themselves, I guess. And here's how it's described. In a frank, honest, and heart-wrenching admission, the school, which ranks among the nation's top boarding schools, believes Jack's death could have been prevented, and stated there also were circumstances in which the involvement of an adult would have made a difference. So basically what we've said, when an adult should have stepped in here and done something about the situation long before this happened. Let's see if I can get down further here. As we seek to improve as a community, we have examined our role and take responsibility for what we could have done differently. Lawrenceville's top priority is the physical, social, and emotional health, safety, and well-being of our students. We recognize that in Jack's case, we fell tragically short of these expectations, the statement read. Jack was universally regarded as an extremely kind and good-hearted young man, with an unwavering sense of social and civic responsibility and a bright future. We continue to mourn this loss, the school wrote in the statement, noting how a settlement had been reached with his parents, William and Elizabeth Reed. The agreement requires the school, which hosts 830 students, to undertake a series of corrective actions, including creating a new dean's position that will focus on the mental health issues. Focus on mental health issues with the goal of becoming a model for anti-bullying and student mental health. Right? Again, if somebody does something awful to you, if somebody abuses you, and you get upset about it, that doesn't mean you're crazy. That is a rational response to being abused. You should get upset if you're abused. That pisses me off. But in any case, and this picture coming up here is the boy's father, and I'm pretty sure something about the way this picture looks tells me this was taken during the time when he was grieving, because he looks like he's trying to look happy and he can't. But this goes on. Let's see.
Yeah, that looks like me trying to smile in any given photograph.
Yeah, it's possible that he
it.
just doesn't smile in photographs too. He does, like a lot of people have that difficulty. But I don't know. And it's possible that because I know his son died, I'm interpreting pain into his face, because I'm dealing with grief currently. But it seems like this is the smile of a guy that's going through something painful. And then, like, I don't know, I lost a classmate in school that was universally loved. Like, this kid seems like he was universally loved. And he was just a really good kid. And it wasn't anything like this. He had a heart condition, and he was in treatment for it. And they took too long, and too long was the normal amount of time that you would expect to take for a condition like this. His condition was worse than they thought. And so we lost him. I was out of school when we lost him for the summer. And when I went back to school, I had his dad in class, and I just had the most terrible time looking him in the eye because you could see it. And I just couldn't look him in the eye without crying because this kid was gone and everybody loved him, but nobody was going to love him as much as his parents, and it just hurt to see it. And I can't imagine what they went through, and I can't imagine what these parents went through. And so that's probably what I'm reading into that face. But I'll go on with the reading. The goal of becoming a model for anti-bullying and student mental health. But are they going to address the false allegations? Like, there should be repercussions for leveling a false allegation. In addition to the act of bullying, that's a lie. When you tell a lie to the authorities in the criminal justice world, for instance, if I had a safe in my apartment and I had valuables to keep in it, like jewelry or something, and I went to the police and I said, somebody broke into my apartment and got into my safe and took the items that were in it out, and they were worth X amount of money, and I filed an insurance claim and all that, and started a criminal investigation, and then it was discovered that I hid them at a friend's house and was committing fraud. In addition to the fraud charges, there would also be charges for filing a false complaint with police and lying to police during an investigation. And if I had named a person that I thought did the theft and then gone into court and testified against them, there would be perjury charges. Those things would happen, right? But if I point a finger at some guy and accuse him of beating on me or raping me, and I do all those same things, lie to police, file a false criminal complaint, lie to police during the investigation, and then commit perjury against the accused, there are systems in place that unfortunately would protect me from accountability. And at the state level, there are ways to fight that. There are lawsuits, there are you can accuse the state of discrimination in order to get the state to hold the person accountable, and they will. It's not common, but it happens. In the school system, there's no recourse. You falsely accuse somebody in the school system, and the principal doesn't punish you for it, doesn't teach you to be more honest. You get away with it, and you learn, I can do this, and it doesn't matter. How many girls are getting taught that in the high school level? How many girls are getting taught that in the junior high school level?
Not a lot of boys are getting taught that either. It's just, I guess, generally assumed that no child would ever be dishonest.
Yeah.
Because then the teacher board or whatever it's called would have to face accusations of, dare I say, victim blaming. It just so happens that young boys and young adult males aren't all that prone to false accusations, but girls very much are.
And unfortunately, girls are learning that, if they stick with allegations like this, they can get away with it, right? And nobody's going to do anything to them about it. If the attempt fails, where they don't get what they wanted, it's just a wash. It's not going to come back on them, and that's a really bad lesson to teach anybody. I can point this social gun at somebody and I can fire it right in their face, right? And, well, if, if it misfires or if they happen to have armor against it, I can just try again some other time. No biggie.
It takes a whole other set of skills to figure out if someone is lying or not. This is one of the most difficult things about being a police detective.
Yeah.
Being able to sit someone down and really talk them through their statements, and really try and get to the nub of the matter as to whether or not they're lying. And it's remarkably difficult because not only does everyone lie, but a great deal of people not only lie, but they're very accustomed to lying. They're very accustomed to getting their story straight. And it's the skill set you need to be a police detective is very different from the skill set you need to be a teacher. And teachers just aren't prepared to go through what a police detective is supposed to be prepared to go through. And so they aren't. They just deal with every claim as though it's true. And so they just assume by default that it is true, and so any student that is prone to being exceptionally good at lying is going to have the upper hand. And as it happens, I'm going to say it, girls are more prone to lying than boys are. And yes, I'm going to say it. I'm going to go ahead and add the proviso that yes, perhaps boys are more naturally violent than girls, but girls are more naturally drawn to lying than boys are. And yet teachers are trained to deal with violence, but they're not trained to deal with lying. And this is the problem. It's just assumed that boys are violent, but it's not assumed that girls are liars. Whereas in reality, they're all violent liars. Well, not all of them, but they both are equally prone to violence and lying. It's just that girls can get away with both of these things because of I don't know because of feminism. Let's just fucking say.
No. It's here's the thing with teachers. They do expect students to lie. It's what the student is lying about that's different. Kid doesn't get their homework done, the teacher expects the student to lie about that, right? If your dog actually ate your homework, your teacher would not believe you. And we had meetings at the beginning of every year with teachers, talking to the whole class, orientation type meetings, where teachers would say that, get your homework done, get it turned in. I don't want to hear that your dog ate it. You better have some sort of documentation of a vet bill for treating the dog for swallowing your homework before I'm going to believe that, right? So they do treat kids as automatic liars in situations like that. But they are literally trained to believe student allegations of any kind of abuse, and they are mandatory reporters if they accuse mom and dad, or if they accuse aunt or uncle or brother or sister, anybody in their home, right? Or another teacher. And so they're predisposed to believe it when they accuse another student. The problem with girls is boys and girls have different ways of fantasy, right? Boys fantasize about being superheroes, police officers, firemen, cowboys, bank robbers, right? Like anything that has any kind of excitement to it that involves action. Girls
fantasize about being victims. Yeah.
The center of attention. They fantasize about being the center of attention. So they fantasize about being beauty queens. They fantasize about being magical. They fantasize about being victims. They fantasize about being the leader of a movement. They fantasize about being like Joan of Arc, right? They don't fantasize necessarily about being the superhero. And when you're a girl and you do fantasize about being a superhero, you damn well better never tell the other girls about it, because they will treat you like you are the weirdest person they ever met. We'll just, unless you like Wonder Woman and Supergirl because they look cool, and not because they protect people and save lives. But yeah.
Cut to the 21st century when all female superheroes are portrayed as being morally perfect,
Right.
physically perfect people who happen to be victims
Yes.
and are only taking out all of their problems on men, even
Well, anyway.
the perfectly mortal men who have done them wrong in some way.
Yes. Well, anyway, when a kid has difficulty separating fantasy from reality, and they start acting on those fantasies, boys get broken bones from jumping off the roof and trying to fly like Superman, or they get into trouble for setting fires so they can put them out like a fireman, or, you know, playing too rough with the other kids, you know, and stuff like that. Girls orchestrate situations to make themselves the center of attention. Right? They tell massive lies. They create drama. They get themselves in trouble with other kids and then run to adults for protection. You know, that's the kind of thing that happens when girls have trouble separating fantasy from reality, and they don't consider the other kids to be human beings that experience their behavior and the fallout from their behavior. They are accessories to the fantasy. So when boys lie, or when boys fail to separate fantasy from reality and they believe things that are not true, or they convince themselves of things that are not true, or they act as those things are true that are not true, you know, they're more likely to get hurt than they are to hurt other people. If they do hurt other people, they do it in ways that they're held accountable for. When girls do that, they blow up their entire social environment, create massive amounts of damage, and then walk away from the explosion behind them, you know, like the action hero in a movie, unscathed and unconcerned that they've done any damage at all. No sense of guilt, no sense of consideration, nothing. Unless there is an adult in their lives that says, look what you did, turn around and see that explosion, see the people in it, see the way it's burning them, that's your fault. Don't do this again. And that's very rare.
I mean, a lot of them do look at the explosion because that's the whole point.
Right. Some of them do get it, and some of them will even get off on the damage they've done. Right? Like, I can make this guy behave any way I want to. I can control anything he does. I can do this. I can do that. But a lot of them just don't care. A lot of them are completely just not oblivious, but stoic. Right? They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. It's beneath them. They're going to go on to the next fantasy. Right? That's it. But going on with this, let's see. We feel like we both have life sentences without the possibility of parole, Jack's mother, Dr. Elizabeth Reed, a clinical psychologist, said to the New York Times. The only thing I'd love to change here is to get Jack back. I can't. I do know if he were alive, he would want me, both of us, to try to make something good out of this and honor him in the way that he lived his life. We think bullying...
I just want to say a thing. I want to say something here. How dare anyone blame toxic masculinity, like the APA guidelines, the Association American Psychological Association? They would blame toxic masculinity on this boy's for this boy's suicide.
Yeah.
They would say, "Oh no, he should reach out." Well, did he not?
Yeah.
And then the system didn't give him what he genuinely needed. And now you're going to blame him again. How dare they?
Well, the worst part is he shouldn't have had to reach out.
No, he shouldn't have had this. This is not damage that should have been done in the first place. But the thing is that this is what they do.
Yeah.
Like, they don't recognize the unique harms that this society, men have to face in this society. They don't recognize them. They refuse to because, of course, they have their orthodoxy that we exist in a society for the benefit of men at the expense of women. They have their orthodoxy, and honestly, I don't know how people can't see this, how scientists will weld themselves to particular viewpoints Well, any group of people will weld themselves to a particular viewpoint and refuse to acknowledge contrary evidence. And it's really bad when it comes to feminism. Because literally the people are born with the lens that makes it difficult for them to see men's issues in the first place as legitimate, as not the responsibility of men. Like this is what I've seen of most people. No offense to the normies. Normies have difficulty comprehending men's issues as something other than men's problems. And the psychologists buy into that. They're part of that mechanic, and all they've done is created a bunch of gobbledygook to justify pre-existing prejudices against men's issues. And then so they won't look at these things, then they won't acknowledge that there are certain things that men have to face, like this boy faced. There are certain pressures, certain forms of persecution that men have to face in our society that women don't. It's very rare for a woman to face this kind of sexual assault allegation, false sexual assault allegation, period. Okay, because men don't make them credibly. Like even a 100% factual and proven sexual assault accusation by a man can still be seen as false simply because he has a penis. All right? So men can't make these accusations. These are things that boys and men face that they won't acknowledge as unique harms and will instead say, oh, it's your toxic masculinity that's to blame, because it's the same mentality. And it's older than feminism. You can even see it in conservative thinking. No offense. This idea that if a man has a problem, it's his fault. Even if that problem was caused by someone else, was directly caused by someone else, as soon as the punch hits his face, it's his fault. He has to deal with it if it's a woman doing it. This mentality is older than feminism, and basically the psychological association has just codified that gender dynamic, that relationship between the genders, which is archaic, that men are responsible for the things that happen to them, even if they have no control over the causal mechanisms. And women are not responsible for the things they do, even if they have full control over the causal mechanisms. This is old. This is the real gender dichotomy. This is the lens that almost everybody operates under. This is like the pressure in people's brains. And the APA is just basically a reflection of that. And I don't know, I just find it astounding because this is something that this shouldn't be put on him at all. And I hope that his mother, because I see that she's a psychiatrist or psychologist, I hope she thinks about this really carefully.
Yeah.
And about what the APA is telling other boys and men about their mental health and their responsibility.
Yeah,
okay.
And this largely explains why the vast majority of normies, as we're calling them, aren't talking about the issues we're talking about men's issues. They would much rather have a pissing contest over this transsexual issue. Because the thing about transsexuals is that on one side of the argument, there's people saying, well, these are people who identify as women, therefore they are victimized as women, and they're being victimized by the patriarchy. And the other side of the normies are saying, no, these are men, and they are endangering women by being in women's spaces. And so they, even though they think they are two diametrically opposed factions of some kind of culture war, they're both doing the same thing. They're both focusing on this paradigm of men are threatening women. They just have different definitions of what a woman is.
What is a woman?
Yeah.
It's like, have you ever seen a dog growling at a mirror?
Yeah, that's pretty much
exactly
what's going
what this
on there.
is. It is. You look when you step out of this dynamic and you can see it for what it is. It is stupid, and it is a failure of self-identification. I mean, dogs, it may not actually be a failure of self-identification when dogs growl at each other because their understanding of self is different than ours. It might be more based on scent. But when you see that, it is a failure to recognize yourself in the mirror. And that's what we're seeing between the TERFs and the conservatives who have this line and the trans individuals who allege trans misogyny. They are both growling at a mirror.
And the worst part
and they
is,
don't even realize it.
What the worst part is, they're all condemning men and masculinity, right? And it used to be that it was most common, and I say common loosely because actual gender dysphoria and transitioning were rare occurrences that happen under rare circumstances. That was not something that you saw very frequently, right? It happened in the past, but it wasn't like right now. You're seeing them everywhere. And one of the things that I noticed looking at it was for every trans woman you ran into, or every 10 trans women or 20 trans women you ran into, you might meet one trans man. One woman might decide, or one girl might decide that she feels like she's more masculine. And I'm trying to figure out, for years and years, why the imbalance. Well, it's pretty obvious. In growing up and everything, I could do every single thing the boys in my neighborhood did, and nobody would say, gosh, you seem more like a boy than a girl. They might call me a tomboy, but it was a cutesy little nickname that I was given that didn't detract from my femininity. And I could run around in blue jeans and a t-shirt playing football with the boys and climbing trees and stuff like that all week long, and wear a frilly dress and a bonnet on Sunday to church, and nobody would bat an eye. Oh, you look so different. You don't look like yourself. Nothing like that would happen. It was, oh, well, Hannah cleans up nice. That's cute. And that's it. But if my brother stepped a little bit out of line, and he really didn't in terms of, he was pretty typical, gender typical, but my first little boyfriend wasn't. He liked some girly things, and he got beat up for it. Right? He wasn't trans, but he wasn't gender typical, so he got beat up for it. I never got beat up for being gender atypical as a kid. Right? I got beat up for a lot of other things, but not that. That's why trans women outnumber trans men, and severely outnumbered trans men throughout the history of trans issues, because the gender role for men and boys is very strict and very narrow, and if you step out of line, your whole identity gets questioned. The gender role for women and girls is wide, dare I say broad, make a pun in the middle of the conversation, but very wide. The gender role for girls and women has a lot of things allowed in it, and it gets expanded all the time, and we're allowed to argue about it and not get treated like we are taking away from society on a moral level. And in fact, women expanding it aren't even criticized for it. You can't get criticized for expanding it. Now, I would say trenders are narrowing that role when what we should be doing is expanding men's role just enough so that they don't feel like they have to be the opposite sex in order to be accepted as human beings because they're a little gender atypical.
Give back their clothing choices they had like 30 years ago, for goodness sake.
I would
have
be
you noticed
happy with, well, yeah, guy can't wear short shorts now, can he?
No, or
short shorts
crop
of the 70s.
tops.
Holy crap.
Or tight pants, or like
Right.
those really crazy butterfly collars with the shirt open to the navel. No, not any of that stuff anymore. And certainly not if you don't have a body like, what's his, Chris Helmsworth? Like,
Yeah.
before in the
there's a lot of
70s, you could be
like there's a lot of
You could
different
be-
things like that. Yeah, you could be slim, very very slim and tall, skinny. You could be tubby. You could have a dad bod. You could be anything in between.
Mhm.
You could have the big bulky muscle figure. You could be sinewy and thin. You could be the uh, 90-pound pencil neck geek, right? You get ribbed about it, but you weren't viewed as not a man because you look that way.
You could look like anything as long as you were good at something, and that would be
Right.
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean, we used to
Well-
have a lot of more expansive, not just for men, but also for women. There were a lot more things that you could take a sense of self from and attractiveness from. Now it's all you have to look like Barbie and not even Ken. You have to look like Ken after 5 years of roids. It's just insane what's happening. At the same time, everything is sexless, like absolutely sexless.
yeah,
Like it just
Metro,
it's without any kind
metrosexual.
of but what I wanted to actually say about this and what you were saying. Well, first of all, there's an upsurgence of trans men now. Like they
Yeah.
now outnumber trans women. And
Especially
I
in
actually was
Canada,
talking about
where,
this years ago.
Autistic girls are being targeted for transition.
I talked about this years ago. If you tell young women, when I talked about it, this hadn't started happening yet. If you tell young women that they are perpetual victims, they're going to be uncomfortable with their gender, their sex, because of that.
Yeah.
And I can see a rash of people starting to want to transition because of the way that we have structured masculine and feminine in our society. And we believe that masculine is oppression, woman is victim, or femininity is victimhood. And the other thing is that we don't actually, like, none of this is really challenging gender roles at all. None of it. And people, like, I mean, there was a period of time when I was a lot younger that I had gender what is it called?
Gender dysphoria.
Dysphoria. It wasn't clinically like I didn't get a clinical diagnosis. They just thought I was fucking weird. And I'm actually sort of glad that I didn't get sucked into that because it did resolve itself to the point where I don't care. Like, I really don't fucking care what people think I am. I am me, so be it. But there are still things that I'm really uncomfortable with when it comes to being female. But, I'm not going to get into that. But the point is that I know, having gone through that, I know what gender is and what gender roles really are. They have nothing to do with pink or blue. They have to do with who has to take responsibility at the end of the day. Who is forced to have the consequences of their actions and the consequences of other people's actions appended to them. That's men. And who is expected to revolve around the well-being of the other. So we have men who are expected to revolve around the well-being of women, who are expected to provide and protect for them. That's the conservative one. That's the conservative framework of gender. The so-called feminist reworking of it is that men are provide and protect for women on a psychological or social level. So they promote this kind of empowerment resource, which is somehow going into their brains and making them feel good about themselves or something. But I've seen it. I've seen it with feminist men. They have not exited the man box. This is the great joke, is that I hear feminist men talk about the man box, and it's like, well, you're still in it. Mm-hmm. You honestly think judging yourself by how well you protect and provide for women on this new resource, which is just psychological, is different than how conservative men judge themselves for protecting and providing for women on a material resource? Because, we hadn't gotten to the point where everybody is materially taken care of yet. You don't see how that's exactly the same. And I'm like watching, what was it, Jubilee? They had male feminists versus male anti-feminists. The male anti-feminists were like, let's talk about men's vulnerabilities and how we can support each other and what we feel about the things that these were the male anti-feminists that were talking about this. that were open about talking about these issues. The male feminists were all to a man beating their chests about being the man who protects women from the bad men out there, about being the man with the biggest count of all the Pokemon that you have to collect. Like, I have a trans man friend, I have a trans woman friend, I have a black woman friend, I got all the Pokemon, I'm the big man on campus, I got all the different varieties and flavor and woman who's a friend of mine. And then the other dude who was like, every virtue I have has nothing to do with my masculinity. It is purely me, as the singular individual who strides upon this earth as a colossus. How dare you say that might be a masculine virtue and not my individual virtue? And I'm like watching these men on the feminist side all strutting around in their little boxes. And then I'm watching the anti-feminist men saying, let's talk about how to support each other, how to recognize the issues that men face and make it so that together we do something better for men. And I'm like, really? You think the feminist men are the ones breaking out of the man box? Seriously? Because they aren't. And that's what's freaking hilarious about all of this. All of this that I see. That we are continuing to go with the same gender roles, the same expectation that men serve women's well-being. And we see this right here in this story. Guess who mattered in this story? It wasn't the boy who commits suicide because he was being bullied after a false accusation. It was to make sure that a girl wasn't being hurt. And that's it. Once they make sure the girl wasn't being hurt, well, who gives a fuck about the boy? Let him suffer. I mean, this is so freaking cruel. It's unbelievable. What would it have cost them to simply say, yeah, this is... Oh, I know what it would have cost them. Probably the girl would have raised a stink, wouldn't she? But what would it really genuinely have cost them to simply say, yeah, these allegations were investigated, they were completely false. All right, stop pestering this boy about this issue. Or even to tell his parents, we don't want to deal with this shit. Take your kid out, take him to a different school. And we will tell everybody it's false, but, just go find another place to be. I mean, even...
The worst thing about it is they could have...
The level of
the
cruelty.
school could have done that. And the students would have continued to bully him unless they mandated a stop to the bullying and penalized it. Because... you can exonerate a guy, right? This is something I tried to explain on Twitter a while back and people took it wrong. There is no such thing as proven innocent. You can say guilty until proven innocent, but there is no such thing as proven innocent. There's really no such thing in the court system as proven guilty either, because not all the evidence gets watched. Not all the evidence gets used in the court system. It gets thrown out by judges all the time, whether it's exculpatory or potentially guilt imposing. And so when you see a result, when there's been an investigation by authorities, and this is any authority, that result is colored or affected, the outcome is affected by the biases of the authority in question, whether it's a judge, a school principal, a teacher, a parent, a boss. So if you have strong opinions about that question, the thing that's being investigated, you might look at the boss and think, well, their biases led them to this conclusion, but I disagree with it. And to you, if the person was guilty and they were exonerated, well, that exoneration was false. Or if they're exonerated in your mind, but the authority decided they were guilty, you're like, well, they've been wrongfully convicted. Right? And you might be right or you might be wrong, but your opinion's not going to change regardless. And it's one of the reasons false allegations are so serious. No matter what comes out in regard to the allegation, no matter how much you prove to the authority who is dealing with the case that the allegation is false, right? If you're 100% exonerated, undeniable concrete proof that the authority looks at and says, well, I can't question this. This is absolute. This person is innocent. There will still be people who presume you guilty. And the only way to prevent that is to treat allegations as so serious that when somebody lies, they have to be penalized for it. It has to be taken seriously. It has to be treated as a form of abuse and a crime, right? So that it becomes rare. It becomes as rare as feminists claim it is.
Even if it's a teenage girl, especially considering they're apparently more sexually mature than teenage boys. Eh?
Especially if it's a teenage girl, because if you don't, she learns that she can get away with that. Right? There has to be repercussions. When a 14-year-old lies and says a boy did something to her that he didn't do, she has to go through something, some sort of repercussions and some sort of reform, some sort of therapy, some sort of rehabilitation process, so that by the end of it, she understands that A, if she does that again, the book's going to get thrown at her, and B, exactly why it should, so that she doesn't do it again. If a 5-year-old, this happened in my neighborhood, I guess 8 years old, but goes to the police and says, I was late getting home from the park because 2 men in a white car tried to get me to get into their car, and I ran away and hid for a long time until they were gone, and then went home. And there was no car and no 2 men. And she gives descriptions and everything. When it comes out that she lied, she should go through some sort of reformation process. She should have some sort of training, therapy, to make her understand the gravity of what she did and what the repercussions will be the next time she does it, and why she should never, ever do it again. While she's young enough that it's not serious for her to get in trouble, and old enough that she can have instilled in her the lesson, do not do this. You are dropping a nuclear bomb on your society when you do this, in your environment where you live and the people you love live.
We have a sex offenders register for a reason. It's a reason that can be abused now and then. But if we're in a situation where 13-year-olds can get put on that register for exchanging like mobile phone pictures of their genitals, then maybe a 17-year-old girl can get put on that register by falsely accusing a 17-year-old boy of raping her and ruining his life.
Yeah.
We can argue about either of those cases either way, but let's if we're going to talk about things in terms of equality,
yeah, if we're going to have one, we should have the other.
Let's narrow down on exactly where this equality should begin and end.
Yep, I agree. I agree very much. And you look at this story. I'm gonna read a little more. We're gonna stop here shortly because we got to get into the after show. But and I have something more. I have something weird for the after show. Just to be kind of not exactly lighthearted, but to laugh at women's logic a little bit, because I'm gonna have to blow off steam after this. Because I've sat and watched friends go through this. And before I read, I'm going to point out, when I say getting upset about a false allegation doesn't make you crazy, I'm saying the act of getting upset is not crazy. It doesn't mean that you don't go through mental health issues. I sat with 7 Years in Hell guy's wife and watched him after one time coming home from being called in for questioning for 12 hours on a false allegation and held in a jail cell with real criminals, and hearing lies and having them try to drum lies into his head about himself. You did this, just admit it, right? Came home and went through the table in his head of prime numbers and squares and square roots, and finally calmed down and explained. He needed to process something through his brain that was tangibly real information, that he knew, concrete information that couldn't be questioned. That's why I get so upset when people try to come up with excuses for why 2 plus 2 can equal 5. No, it can't. You're full of shit. Shut the fuck up. Numbers are real. Numbers were the thing that kept him from completely losing his mind that day. Right? And he's not crazy for being upset. But being upset can make you feel crazy. It can drive you nuts. It can make you suicidal. It can make you feel like you need to be in a straitjacket. It can make you sit in a corner in the hallway of your home on the floor and count so that you have something real that you can talk about after 12 hours of having unreality forced down your throat. And
before we get any angry responses, I should clarify, numbers aren't real. They are an abstraction. They're a symbolic abstraction that humans came up with to represent the quantities in reality, but those quantities in reality are real. So if 2 is real, then 4 is real. Therefore, 2 plus 2 does equal 4. Sorry.
Yeah, but that makes numbers real. Language is real. It's an abstraction, but it's a real abstraction. You know, when I describe the word desk, when I use the word desk, and you get a mental image of what I'm talking about, it doesn't have to be the desk that I've got my hand on right now. Right?
In that sense, numbers are more real than a desk.
Yeah.
It's difficult to define what a desk is. It's very, very easy to define what a 2 is.
Exactly. You will picture a desk, though. When I say that, if you speak English and I say desk, you will picture a desk. You will know what I'm talking about. I would have to describe the desk further with adjectives and full sentences and so on for you to understand what the desk under my hand looks like. But you now have an mental image of me having my hand on a flat surface, because the top of a desk usually has a flat surface. Right? Just from that, when I say the number 2, you picture the number 2, and if I say 2 apples, you picture 2 apples. You might picture 2 red apples or 2 green apples or whatever, but you picture 2 apples. You don't picture 7 or 8 apples or 27 apples. That's real. That's concrete. That's solid. Taking away somebody's reality is how torturers dissolve the boundaries in a person's brain that prevent them from sharing information that they want to keep for themselves. Right? It's how they dissolve the boundaries in a person's brain that keep them from making their choices based on what you want instead of what they want. It's how they enslave people, and it's how they drive people to suicide. It's used in war to get enemy soldiers to share information that will lead to the deaths of their comrades, or to go kill those comrades. But yeah. To subject a 17-year-old to it, no big deal. It's only deadly, right? And that's this article. The reason this article pissed me off so badly is because of how blasé the school was about this, and I'm really glad that the writer used the word bullying to describe making a false allegation, because that is our code for abuse when we're talking about children doing it. We don't talk about abuse as abuse when children do it. We say bullying. And the mom, when she talked to the media, she got some things and she missed some things, but one thing that she really understood, he had to escape the pain from the humiliation he was feeling. That is why her son killed himself. It wasn't just because people were shoving unreality at him. It wasn't just because he was hearing about this over and over again. Being accused of something that you would never do, something reprehensible, something socially unacceptable, something that is a social taboo, is humiliating. It challenges your identity. We hear about people getting suicidal, becoming suicidal, because their gender dysphoria goes unconsidered. This boy's dysphoria was he was accused of something he did not do, and he was humiliated that people thought he did it. He was humiliated by being treated as someone he was not. That's very serious. If you accept that people kill themselves because you think they're a man and they think they're a woman, then you have to accept that it is deadly to over and over again tell an innocent person you raped that girl.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction to at least finally call this bullying rather than calling it nothing at all. Or rather than just calling it a false accusation, even though that's an accurate description of what it is. The right description would be abuse. When it comes to 17-year-olds, there's no good reason to apply it with euphemisms such as bullying. It's very much abuse. The only question is how young a person can be, but before we can no longer justify calling it abuse. And I guess that's a discussion for another day. And another discussion would be at what point, when a female teacher rapes a student, we stop calling it seduction.
Yeah.
That's yet another story for another day.
Which at some point I'm gonna go over. Well, there's a big list of teachers in Canada. There's somewhere I had a similar list of teachers in the United States, and it seems to have been taken down. But big list of 500 teachers that were convicted. I know there's at least 2 or 3 here in the Dayton metro area that I've read about in the last 10 years. I know there's more than that, but that's going to have to be a different show altogether, because this is we're going long on this, but it goes on. The school explained how after a student who previously had been disciplined for bullying Jack was expelled for an unrelated violation of school rules, Jack was allowed to return to the school, but was left largely unsupervised where students gathered. So they didn't even do anything to mitigate the bullying. Some harsh words were said about Jack. The school revealed, adding that administrators did not notify or check on Jack once he was back on campus. Later that night, Jack, who was a Dean's List student, took his own life, telling a friend that he could not go through the ordeal again. He had a Bible in one of his gym shorts, as well as a note directing his parents to a Google document in which he described his helplessness. And I'm not gonna read the school statements because we don't have the time. But
it's all just corporate speak anyway.
Yeah, it's all just basically. But I will point out, they said again, we acknowledge that more should have been done to protect Jack. More than what? Nothing was done to protect. More than nothing is very little, right? More than nothing isn't enough. It's not just more to protect Jack. More should have been done to hold the accuser accountable. They can protect all of the future Jacks by holding, I don't know what her real name is, but I'm going to use Jill because people will remember that because of Jack and Jill. More should have been done to Jill to protect all the future Jacks. Following his suicide, the board's trustees hired a law firm to investigate the circumstances surrounding his death. The investigation, it's good that they had an outside investigation, but for Pete's sake, a law firm. The investigation included interviews with 45 students, faculty members, and others, together with a review of more than 100 emails from students and school personnel, Jack's personal emails, phone records, text messages, and internet searches. We said from the beginning, let's seek the truth and follow it where it leads us, period. Stephen S. Murray, Lawrenceville's head of school, said to the New York Times, and that's what we've tried to do every step of the way. He added, "This happened on my watch and I'm grief-stricken, and yet I can't begin to compare that to the grief and sorrow of Bill and Elizabeth Reed." The schools say they are to introduce meaningful changes that will support the school's aspirations of becoming a model for anti-bullying and student mental health. The settlement agreement and the school's admission of responsibility are aimed at honoring Jack, taking appropriate responsibility, and instituting meaningful changes that will help prevent something similar from happening again. The admission by a Lawrenceville school is particularly rare, with educational establishments not usually publicly accepting responsibility after a suicide.
Is it?
Yeah, they don't usually. They will do anything they can to avoid admitting responsibility. It's rare, and it is a baby step, but it doesn't excuse, like, they shouldn't have been responsible in the first place. And I don't know that this is going to change things.
This is what I was saying earlier. Like, there's an increasingly large amount of suicides among young people and teenagers, and one can only assume a great deal of them are, quote unquote, we don't know why. One has to wonder how many of them are because of shit like this.
How many of them are simply because, what the hell are people telling boys and girls? Girls, you're oppressed. And the other thing is, if you understand human instincts, because I've sort of had this drilled into my head over the years and years and years of advocating for these issues and coming up against this wall, I'm hitting my head against this brick wall, and I've had to realize that part of what we're hitting our head against is the fact that men see their positive identity in terms of protecting and providing for women. That's how men feel like they are men. And that's instinctual. And I mean, it makes perfect sense, because human women are not independent in the way other female mammals are. Like I say this on the other shows. You look at a female tiger. If a female human was like a female tiger, she could operate on the level of a Navy SEAL, kill Obama bin Laden, give birth on the same day, and then just continue on. That's the way that a lot of female mammals are. They're very independent. They do not need the level of provision and protection that human females do. There's no female animal on the planet that needs more. And what a surprise that around the species in which the female animal needs so much provision and protection, what do we see? All of this provision and protection in the form of a society. Where does it come from? It comes from our instincts. It comes from men's instinct to provide and protect for women. And that's a reality.
Women's exploitation of those instincts, because those instincts don't the instinct to do it isn't the instinct to form your identity around it. And I think the way women control society, they have orchestrated that as an identity thing, and not. I agree the instinct is there, and I've had experiences that I can't talk about because I would be giving somebody's medical information away, that confirm for me that it is instinctive. Men have a strong protective instinct and a strong caring instinct toward women. Women used to, at least, reciprocate that, and they don't now. So I don't think as an identity it's an instinct, but I think as a behavior it's an instinct. And it's important to differentiate, because there's a level of gynocentrism that we have hit in our society that we must never treat as inevitable and irreversible. And that's
I don't think I'm
purposeless
treating it
gynocentrism that leads to this kind of thing.
I'm not trying to treat it as inevitable or irreversible.
I just want it to be clear, because there are people that are arguing natural gynocentrism within the men's rights movement and the greater anti-feminist movement that will use any statement about natural
here's the other thing.
What you were talking about, to justify that.
Even if men are vulnerable to women making their identity in this way. And I would argue that they are, and feminists prove that.
Yeah, and they
that
take
does not
advantage of it,
mean
right?
that women should be taking advantage of it. Even if we say men have a vulnerability because of these instincts, they orientate their sense of morality around protecting and providing women, which is fundamentally a part of your identity, what you think is moral. That does not mean that women then have the right to exploit it,
right,
to the detriment of everyone around them.
In fact,
in particular
exploiting
men.
it is a sign of immaturity. Your woman card should be taken away. You're just a little girl if you exploit it.
Okay. But my overall point is recognizing these instincts. In fact, I think I've lost a bit of where I was going with this.
Sorry.
Where were we? Where did this start? Recognizing these instincts. All right, I'm sorry. I can't. I will try to get back to where I was going with this.
Yeah, we were talking. You were talking about the difference between other mammals and women and how.
Okay, all right, but here's the thing, and here's where it gets into exploitation and terrorization of women. Okay, there's one thing to say, all right, that this isn't something that's acceptable. It's another thing to say to women who are reliant, because there are two sides to this. There are men who are reliant, whether or not it's moral. I'm just saying it is an is, not an ought. Who are reliant on the idea that they're protecting and providing for women in order to generate a positive sense of their self. And then there are women who are reliant on the idea that they are being protected and provided for by men to have a sense of comfort in their world. Now, I would say that these two things exist because women are very reliant. Like human women are reliant in a way that no other animal is, which would tend to create a psychology that's dependent on that reliance on men. And what do? You march into that and you tell girls and women who have that psychological dependence, and that's not necessarily, that's an is, not an ought, that the people they are dependent on them hate them, are at war with them, want to destroy them and make them suffer in the most animalistic and barbaric ways. You say that, and that is a recipe for 100% misery in women's lives.
True.
Like there's churning, ugly, vicious misery will come out of that. And when we talk about the suicide of young people, maybe we should look at the messaging we're giving girls, because girls are catching up, not very slowly. The men are still way out ahead, but apparently in the last 2 or 3 years, teenage girls in particular have surged ahead in suicide statistics. You know, maybe we should look at what we're saying to girls and boys about a very essential part of their identity, which is their sexuality and their gender. Okay? Maybe we should stop telling girls that the people they're instinctually primed to rely on despise their very being and want to annihilate them while raping them to death. And maybe we should tell boys who are instinctually primed on regarding their sense of self-worth in terms of how they benefit and protect and provide for women, that what they want to do secretly is rape women to death. Just pop out an eyeball of a woman and just rape the socket until she bleeds to death or some horrific shit. I know that's a very vicious image, but this is the kind of crap we are telling, slight hyperbole, slight dark humor, I don't know if humor is the right word, slight dark hyperbole. But
Stand
this is
by
the
it,
kind
Allison. It's a good imagery.
Okay, this is the kind of crap we're telling boys and girls. And then we step back and we're like, why are they killing themselves? How could this be? Where is this coming from? Why don't they want to identify as boys and girls? Why is there all this dysfunction? Really? And the funny thing is that conservatives do not want to look at the eye of this storm. They don't want to call out where it's coming from. It's coming from this. And it's in a deeper sense. It's not just coming from the feminist. The deeper thing that it's coming from is the condemnation of male sexuality that is in conservatism. I'm not saying you can't be Christian, but it's there. That condemnation, that belief in male sexual sin relative to female sexuality is right there. And you need to challenge it at its source. You need to stop it there. Because we're now in a position where the cultural expectations of Christianity sort of not around anymore. So we're left with the condemnation of male sexuality. And the only way to get out of this trap is to stop doing it. Here's the thing. From what I can tell from human history, we exist in the world that we do, in the comfort that we do, in the peace and prosperity that we do, because of male sexuality. Not in spite of it, because of it. We should be thankful for the sexuality that human men have. Because it's a sexuality in which they provide and protect, they build houses, they build societies, they build infrastructure and utilities to make sure that women and other men and the vulnerable members of a society are protected for. That is an essential component of men's sexuality and reproductive instincts, and we should celebrate it. We should recognize it, and we should never condemn it as somehow sinful or a vector of sin in any context into the human race. It's why we're here. It's why we're having these discussions. It's why we have language. It's why we have everything. You really think that male tigers are going to construct a society for a female tiger that can do everything for herself? No. And furthermore, do you really think there's going to be this codependence in which, or interdependence in which women are doing their own contributions that aren't just about survival? That's the big thing. You know, what were women doing when men took on the role of provision and protection and establishing a social cooperation that keeps the lions and bears at bay? They were weaving and creating pottery and doing the first stirrings of agriculture. You know, this has been a co-produced effort throughout the millennia. And it starts with male sexuality being something worth celebrating and not condemning. And this is this whole situation with this boy, that we are so keyed to condemn male sexuality, to just accept the idea that men should live under this condemnation, this hatred, this abrogation, or however you say that fucking word, of male sexuality. And that when a boy is charged with the most horrific crime, and it is the most horrific crime, you know, the human mind boggles at rape. There's nobody who really thinks that rape is good. Even rapists don't think rape is good. They're just so fucked up. They have these compulsions around it. Okay? Nobody likes it. It is the worst crime. It is the irredeemable crime in our society. And we are okay with leveling that at a boy, an innocent, because we have this attitude that all men are foul. All men are rapists. So who cares? Who cares if he has to deal with just a little bit more of what he should already be dealing with because he's a man? Fuck that! Okay. I've gotten a little feisty.
Well, I can't blame you for that, but I would point out, not only did they think it was okay to just level it at him, they didn't expect it to affect him. Can you imagine that? We're just going to call you the worst thing that you can be called. You know, like the second worst thing, because we're not accusing him. He wasn't accused of pedophilia. But the second worst thing you can be called. And it's not supposed to have any impact on you at all. You shouldn't care. Why not? Why shouldn't he care? Why shouldn't he be profoundly disturbed by it? Why should they not have expected him to be not just upset, but devastated, angry, scared, driven a little nuts, and considering suicide, looking for a way to escape? Why would that not occur to you? Maybe if you didn't value somebody because of his gender. Maybe if you had no compassion because of his gender. Like, maybe that might be why. Mike, did you start to say something?
Yeah, I was somewhat inspired by Alison's rant. I mean, we're living in a future that has resulted from centuries. I mean, if not millennia, of this gynocentrism, of this pressing on men to innovate, and it's very much a double-edged sword. You might say that it's as a result of these of centuries of this that we even have the ability for you and for I and you two to be talking to each other, for this space age ability to communicate, to get ideas across to other people at light speed at other ends of the universe, and so yes, maybe this wouldn't have happened if that didn't happen. But the other edge of the sword is the wars that have been happening since 100 years ago, and you might say all of this is a result of sharpening the masculine need, the masculine desire, the masculine responsibility to make life better for everyone, and it results in miraculous developments in science and technology, and it also results in unspeakably hideous acts of war. And I guess it's up to generations like us and generations long since before us. We should have figured this out a long time ago. How to figure out how to bring out this this male desire to protect people in ways that can do all the things that make our lives better without bringing out all the things that make our lives worse. And that's easier said than done, I suppose. But what we're trying to do on this channel, what us small band of bleeding hearts and artists have been trying to do for the last 10 years, is to get across that there is an alternative present that we could be living in right now, where men have been pressed to give us all these technological advances without, warring against each other in the ways that we've continued to do so. And it's difficult to get this across without sounding like some fucking commie where we can all live as one in harmony as a one world government, because that totally won't go wrong. But it's
I think it's just the simple assertion that there's nothing that goes, like, there's nothing bad about bringing more love and consideration into the world.
Yeah.
And men are sorely in need of it.
Yeah, and maybe the good has come from that, and the bad has come from. I've reduced everything to good and bad, as I try to tell myself not to do. But yeah, to some degree, we have liberated men and women to some degree in the past few centuries, and perhaps the liberation that we've given to men has given us all these advances that have made our lives so much more invigorating and, dare I say, easier. But the chickens have come home to roost with regards to the obligations we've put on men at the same time. And I guess you can't swap the present for a different present, but we're at a point where we can change the future, and it involves giving men all of these acceptances, like they're allowed to be themselves for their own sake. Like a lot of these advantages have come from men being allowed to be themselves for their own sake. Like aeroplanes were invented because the Wright brothers didn't marry.
Yeah.
The computer was invented because Alan Turing wasn't all that interested in pleasing women. Like a lot of these things have come about because men were allowed to just work on their passions until the government castrated them for loving men for one reason or another.
Yeah,
And
do electricity. I mean,
if we could just let men be men, you'd be surprised what kind of things can happen in our future. Like we've almost allowed to happen.
yeah.
up to but not including a point in the past couple of centuries. Like
And
we've had half of the right idea, but the other half of the idea is in awful danger of being the part of the idea that destroys us all. So we're on a knife edge. I mean, you know this already. All of you know this
Right.
already. Just preaching to the crowd. I know.
and feminists have attacked the idea of letting men be themselves for the sake of being themselves, with their whole narrative about boys being boys. Oh, boys will be boys is an excuse for rape. It's not. It's an excuse to allow boys to figure themselves out without having a bunch of females around yelling at them for having too much rough and tumble play and being too curious about things that girls think are gross. So there you go. I'm gonna call the end of the show because it's 15 minutes almost past when we should have ended. But I will leave you with this. When feminists lie about masculinity, when feminists lie about the level of compassion men and boys deserve when they are mistreated, and when feminists lie about the impact of abuse faced by men and boys at the hands of women and girls who lie about them, the result is that we lose the men and boys that we love in our lives to suicide or to murder. Right? That's an undeniable fact. There are stories like this about boys and men who have been murdered by other boys and men on false allegations. And there are stories like this about boys and men who have committed suicide on false allegations. And until we can admit as a society that leveling a false allegation is abuse, that it has absolutely nothing to do with victims of the crime that you're exploiting in your false allegation, and that it is something for which the accuser should be held accountable, we will continue to lose good men and good boys to bad lies. That should be enough to motivate society to do something about this. Even if they don't have any compassion, even if they don't care about the feelings of the men and boys involved. Because they're all valuable. But we'll see. I hope the school, in their bullying prevention system that they come up with, I hope they take that seriously. But I'm not going to hold my breath. And we're going to have to keep pushing and discussing this online, discussing it in public with people, and discussing it among friends and families. This kind of discussion moves the Overton window on these topics to what people will and won't accept, that makes it more and more acceptable to criticize false accusers and more unacceptable to be one. So that's what I'm going to leave you with tonight. You can't just listen to us do it. If you want to see less of this kind of news story, then you need to hold the people around you accountable. The people that you talk to on social media, the people in your life, for recognizing that if someone levels a false allegation and then they encourage sustained bullying, sustained abuse by their community in response to their false allegation, and the person that they accused commits suicide, they drove him to it. It was not an accident. They have guilty mind, and they are a murderer. She is a murderer. The girl that accused this boy murdered him.
Negligent homicide at the very least, if that's still a thing in her state.
Here's the thing. If you engage in a course of action that leads to somebody's death, they don't have to prove that you intended for the person to die. They only have to prove that you premeditated the course of action that was intended to do damage. So if you beat somebody to death and you planned to beat that person up and they die, you can get charged with murder even if you say, I didn't intend for him to die. So there you go.
That's what I mean by negligent homicide.
But that's
means,
a different
right?
charge. Negligent homicide is a different charge from murder. Murder is specific. And I use the word murder very seriously here. She meant for this boy to suffer. You mean for somebody to suffer when you do this to them. He suffered to death. Whether she meant for death to be the result or not, she's a murderer. Because
negligent murder?
No, it's not negligent. Because she made him suffer on purpose. You know, if you shoot somebody and you just meant to hurt them, but you hit a artery or a vein that goes to the heart or goes from the heart, you're still a murderer. Like, that's it.
And the state is an accessory to that murder. Maybe they can be held accountable too, eh?
I wish. But that's the thing. We need to get people to understand this. This is not... The gravity of this is much, much deeper than people really understand. So that's what I want to get across. It's our job. When I say our, I mean everybody listening to this and us. It's our job as a movement to get our society to understand these things. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, one social media argument at a time. So that's your homework for the week. Obviously, it's ongoing forever until people act on this, until things change. So there you go. In the meantime, I don't think we got any super chats. I will look in the super chows. I suck at this part. Because I never can find the damn thing. There it is. Super Chow channel. And we always have Super Chows. So, alright. Go back to where it says done. HBR Talk 259, that's us. $5 from Meredith G. Says, honey for the Badgers. Thanks for the thought-provoking discussion. Michael Emmerich Winberg gave us $15 and said the most infuriating thing about this is the halfwits who crawl out of the woodwork to talk about how this only hurts real victims of rape. It doesn't hurt real victims of rape at all.
I mean, Jack was the real victim of rape, if anything. No rape occurred.
Yes.
But he's the victim of rape hysteria. So it's the closest thing to anything that counts.
Yep, and Michael goes on to say, no, they hurt the victims of the allegation, which is worse than any rape. And he's right, it is. As the allegation goes on forever, even if proven false or withdrawn, start with a core effect on these these accusations, or this ship is never going to turn away from the abyss. I know this may be a mean thing to say, but at least rape ends after a few minutes. Or at least it ends after the crime stops, I will say that. And you're right. A false allegation goes on forever, and even people who know you're innocent will mistreat you. Like, it doesn't even have to be a big allegation. I mean, I was falsely accused of a misdemeanor. As I've talked about this before, I was assaulted by another woman, and in my course of trying to exit the fight and not participate in it, like just struggling to get out of there, that was considered fighting, being an equal fighter. And even though I did nothing in an attempt to hurt her, because if I had, I'm not very good at mitigating the damage if I'm in a fight and I fight in earnest. I don't have that level of skill. There's a lot of people that do have that level of skill. They can hit you hard enough to make you want to stop hitting them without breaking bones or doing organ damage or anything like that. I'm not as good at that as they are. And I'm not good at stopping when I should stop once I let myself get into that mentality, so I don't fight. I mean, I'm an adult, so I try not to fight anyway. Like, you don't do that after you grow out of that by the time you hit the age of majority, unless there's something wrong with you. Right? That's, in my opinion anyway. But
those of us who have the option of getting shit off our chest on the internet to an audience of hundreds, at least have that option. Anyone out there listening to us who doesn't have this option, please do speak out. Talk to us in the comments. I don't often say this, but please do leave a comment if you've never had the option of getting this shit off your chest.
Yeah,
we're right here for you if you feel like doing that.
Yeah, I know, and I've been candid about having been a rape victim too. And I will say this: just being accused of a misdemeanor, a disorderly conduct, for trying to escape a fight that I didn't want to have. That was as traumatic as being held down, wrestled into submission, and raped. Because I was lied about. And people believed it. People thought I was violent. On purpose. And people treated me like I was confrontational and dangerous. And I don't know how to explain it, but people took in a way of doing that, it's like taking away some of my identity. That is not me that they were talking about, but they were identifying me as that person that wasn't me. And that was just a very minor thing that if I had not been exonerated, had that removed from any record, it would have been gone in 6 months. Right? That's a bump in the road. I can't imagine getting accused of raping someone. Like, I can understand completely why 7 Years in Hell guy sat in a corner in the hallway of his house in front of his bedroom and spouted off numbers and mathematics to have something concrete. Because having somebody do that to you, make you out to be somebody that you're not, and try to make it stick in a courtroom under the law, makes you feel crazy, even though you're the one telling the truth. It is absolutely worse. You can get up and walk away after you've been assaulted. You can get up and walk away after you've experienced even molestation. You can move on from that. There's psychological damage, but you can get help for it. And it's not something like, it doesn't take your identity away.
Like, even if you have some kind of violent crime committed against you, you can write songs about it. I know that sounds like a frivolous thing to say, but whatever happens to you, and I mean to you, in whatever way you're victimized in life, you can write songs about it.
Yeah, I've done that, but none of y'all are going to see it.
And yeah, and you don't have to show those songs to other people, but you can at least get it off your chest by writing songs about it. I don't imagine you can do that about being accused of rape. Not only because you most certainly can't publish those songs so that anyone else could hear them, because it would only deleteriously affect your case, but because in your own head it would deleteriously affect your case.
Yeah.
I would imagine you can't even. How are you supposed to write an angry song about being accused of rape? It's not even. You can't even. I'm having trouble even putting this into words, but because I can't even imagine it. That's what's so hideous about this. You can't even imagine it unless it's happened to you, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that I can't even imagine what it's like. I don't even want to imagine what it's like, so I'll stop.
It should never happen to anybody. It just should never happen. Xerinx gave us $5 and said the definition of ism is doctrine or theory. Feminism is the doctrine or theory of the feminine. I made a super chat about this in the past, but I called it an empty suit because it was mainly a placeholder for whoever spoke as a feminist. Now I think the term feminism is actually circular statement or argument. Recently, a woman said a woman shouldn't have to apologize for anything she does to be acknowledged. That made me think of the letter bombing and scum manifesto, etc. So it made me think feminism equals... okay, so there's a symbol in here I'm not familiar with, but GYN, I think that's supposed to be /volt, or woman wills it. And honestly, it's not even all that, because feminists don't tolerate non-feminist ways of thinking. If you don't subscribe to that crazy conspiracy theory and make demands based on it, they don't want anything to do with you, or they want to take you down. So
yeah, it's like the difference. It's like the difference between proud of your nation and being a nationalist. But it's not even like that, because you can even be a nationalist, and that just means you prefer your nation over other nations.
yeah.
But you still allow other nations and the peoples of those nations to prefer their nations over your nation. That's not the case with feminism. Feminism is a globalist movement, which is by definition even more tyrannical than any nationalism possibly could be. In the same way that nation becomes nationalism, feminism becomes feminism, and that means a global takeover of everything based on femin. So I don't understand why all these anti-nationalists are all, yeah, nationalism's awful, and we should anyone who is even proud of their nation should be called Nazis. But feminism is good, because that's totally different.
It's crazy. It's the same thing as when you think a source is bullshit on something that you're an expert on, but then you take them at their word on something that you don't know anything about.
The Murray-Gell-Mann amnesia is called, yeah.
Yeah, it's like people compartmentalize, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes you can compartmentalize in ways that are healthy. Like being able to recognize that the living room is on fire right next to the stairway you have to go up to get to your kid's bedroom, and still being able to recognize that your kids are up there and you want to get them out of the house, and you'll brave the fire to go up there to get them out. Because, yes, there's a fire, but my kids, right? Compartmentalism works in situations like that, but it's very dysfunctional in a lot of other ones. Michael Emmerich Winberg, that's Emmerich Winberg, gave us $5 and said, "We have dealt with men's physical advantage over women by the rule never hit a woman. Because we know it can be abused if not acknowledged, and said abuse isn't punished. Unfortunately, we do not teach women to never lie about men, never lie about a man, because this would require acknowledging an abusable advantage women have over men, and even if we did, the idea that a woman could abuse it. Because women's virtue goes hand in hand with women's powerlessness, because reasons." There's a lot more complexity to this, and I probably need to do a show on it. I did a video on it, but I've also learned something not too long ago, just from an experience of a person who had no reason whatsoever to understand never hit a woman as a taboo. And I watched a person in that condition respond to thinking that he had accidentally hurt me, the same way that a man has had that taboo driven into him all of his life since early childhood. And that tells me there's some instinct there as well. Men don't like to hurt people.
It's why it's generally understood that men are generally more individualistic and women are generally more collectivist. Or
Well,
at least
there's also
men's interests are more individualistic, and women's interests are more
collective,
collectivist, social, and
Yes.
this extends into government, and this is why the bigger and more powerful governments become, the more gynocentric they become, because it's generally assumed, almost genetically, that an individual man has power over an individual woman, and so we've created this collectivism. originally genetically, but eventually socially and eventually legally, to offset this by
Right.
having some kind of system that gives women advantage over men. And I would assume at some point, maybe in this development, we develop this sort of balance, but we've gone way beyond the point where it's balanced.
Well, and there's a reason. You know, men instinctively, men don't like to hurt people. Like I've noticed this, and I sort of put it on a back burner of, well, we have this taboo, we have this. No, men don't like to hurt people, and they in particular don't like to hurt people who are not as big and strong and smart and fast and so on as they are. They don't like to hurt people they view as vulnerable, and they don't like to hurt people who have any neoteny to their look at all. Right? They don't like to hurt children. They don't like to hurt women, and it's typical of men to feel bad if they think they've hurt somebody who is smaller and weaker than they are, or who is perceived as smaller and weaker than they are. And it may have much to do with that taboo. That taboo maybe takes it to a much higher level than it needs to be. But it's not the only cause of that. And women take advantage of that, right? Because we know, and there's an instinct to taking advantage of that as well. We know that we can appeal to that. And we know that instinctively that it makes us safer around men who care about us, or who even just seem to be upstanding in their community, upstanding members in their community, as opposed to men who don't seem to be upstanding members in their community, right? So because of that, it's made it, we've created a situation where a man's vulnerability to being lied about is profoundly deepened. It's profoundly spread. Any woman can do it, and it has an impact that is disproportionate, like hitting a baseball, but when it lands, it's a comet. And we haven't paid attention to that as a society. We haven't recognized that men will instinctively react to that, and men outside the allegation will instinctively react by protecting the woman, and men who are the target of the allegation will instinctively react by feeling ashamed, feeling humiliated, feeling wrong. There will be a sense of consistent wrongness about them. That's not something that they can help, right? So we've dealt with men's physical advantage over women by making that rule, but that rule is based on something that, like, men didn't just pull that rule out of their asses. They recognize it as a boy matures into a man, this part of him grows that makes him protective of the people around him that are smaller and weaker, right? And so we will make this a standard in society because it shows the kind of maturity that makes a man a valuable member of his society. And unfortunately, we've failed to teach women to respect the impact of exploiting that phenomenon. So we get right back to...
We're a social species.
Yeah.
Like men and women alike understand.
Yep. So we get right back to what I said before. You know, don't just listen to us talk about this. You have to spread that understanding. We need everybody on that, not just us. We're just a few people, and we have a lot of listeners. But the more conversations that happen around this, where it's understood that A, women shouldn't take advantage by lying, and B, women shouldn't take advantage by hitting, because only a bully hits somebody who's not allowed to hit them back, right? Until that becomes common thought, we will continue to see stories like this over and over again. So there you go. You don't have to spread it at work. But you know, like, you can't talk... I understand most people can't talk politics at work. But You know, just among the people
No,
you're close to, at least.
Yeah, please don't talk about the shit we talk about at work. You'll only get fired.
Yeah, talking politics at work doesn't work. Especially not in the United States. So, let's see, we have, now I haven't moved to a Rumble after show yet. Somebody asked about that on Rumble. I will, in the future, I think, do our after shows on Rumble, if we need to. But, yeah, we haven't got any paid Rumble rants. Yeah. Well, Mr. Stevenson once highlighted, this is, Meow for Cena. I hope I said that right. No, Meow for Cena. Mr. Stevenson once highlighted a segment from one of the ICMI events in which they mentioned how, despite all of the talk about mental health, nobody talks about the concept of mental torment. That's an important point.
That wasn't me. That was some fella from the ICMI event in 2017. I mean, yeah, it was a very good point, but it was 6 years ago, and it was some other guy.
Yeah,
and it was somewhere else altogether. But it was a good point.
It's a good thing to highlight, and I think that's what he was pointing out, was that you've mentioned this before. It's an important point, because mental torment has to be understood in order to promote mental health. So there you go. I think that was probably the most important one to really read out loud. But yeah. With that, I think we are going to go into the after show. So I will thank you guys for sticking out the long sausage with me. Thanks everybody for listening to this one. This one was a rough one. And thanks to everybody that works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.